Hey, what's up guys? It's Brendan here from addictgaming.net. Today we are going to go over a warrior build that takes advantage of Eviscerate on the axe and Arcing Arrow on the longbow to do massive amounts of damage. Alright guys, so let's jump into the build and talk about it a little bit before we get into the specifics. This is a warrior build that I've been using in SPVP for a little while now. And this build is actually very popular in SPVP. It's actually one of the meta builds right now. I use a variation of the build to fit my playstyle. I encourage you guys to do the same. Whenever you see a build video or you look at a build, always keep in mind your playstyle, and you can always make changes here and there to a build. You don't have to follow it verbatim. So I would encourage you guys to do the same thing. That's what I like to do as well. So this build takes advantage of the axe shield and the longbow weapon sets, which is, before you might think that was actually an unusual weapon set combo. Usually the axe's shield is paired up with a greatsword. Sometimes people will even bring a hammer, but you never really saw it with longbow so much before. Now there are quite a few reasons why you should bring longbow over the greatsword in SPVP. I think greatsword can still be argued to be better than the longbow in World vs. World, mostly because of the mobility. And if you like to roam or you run in smaller groups, then mobility becomes very important in World vs. World. So you can say that the greatsword might still be a better choice out in World vs. World. But in SPVP, there are quite a few reasons. The first reason is that Arcing Arrow on the longbow is an extremely hard-hitting AoE, and it's very, I say, because SPVP is fought on points, it's much more likely you're going to hit with your hard-hitting abilities on your longbow than you are with your greatsword. And you can stand at range and hit very hard. You don't have to. The thing is, when you're in your axe and shield, you have to get up close and then use your burst abilities and your auto attacks to do damage. And then you could always fall back and pull out your longbow and do a lot of physical damage with your longbow just standing back as well. So that's one reason. Another reason is that you can stack might with the longbow. You have the combustive shot, which is the burst ability on the longbow that puts down a fire field, and you could use your arcing arrow inside that fire field and give might to yourself and to your allies, which is always important. One of the things about this build is that we are very, very good at stacking might on ourselves, and in almost any given battle we'll have 20 plus stacks of might on us. And we get that through a lot of sources. We'll talk about that later, but one of the combos between the longbow and the axe and shield is that you can put your fire field down, switch to your axe and shields, and then use your shield rush on your shield, and then you get a fire shield, and whenever somebody hits you, then you have a chance to gain might. So that just helps us stack might. That's another nice little combo between those weapon sets. But the main point I'm getting to is when we have 25 stacks of might on, our condition damage is almost 900 condition damage. And that's no joke. That's a lot of condition damage, especially because we're in a berserker build in this build. So if we put our combustive shield down, or our combustive shot down, and we hit somebody with the pin down, which puts 6 stacks of bleeding and immobilize on them, and we switch to our axe and shield, especially if we're fighting on a point and we put our combustive shot down, they're going to have to stand in the fire field. And our burns and our bleeds are actually hitting fairly hard for a berserker build. So it just adds a lot more damage than a hammer or a greatsword could do. So if you think about, you go into the greatsword and you start doing damage, as soon as you leave the greatsword into axe and shield, you're not benefiting from the greatsword anymore. But in the longbow, when you switch to axe and shield, you're still hitting them with your burning and the bleeding from pin down. You're still benefiting from the longbow even if you switch to axe and shield. Another big reason is that with the longbow, in any warrior build, when you have the cleansing ire trait, the condition removal in this build is pretty ridiculous, because what cleansing ire is whenever we spend adrenaline, depending on how many bars of adrenaline we spend, that's how many conditions we remove. Now with any other weapon, you actually have to hit your target to waste that adrenaline. So if I use Eviscerate on my axe and somebody blocks that attack or somebody dodges my attack, I don't actually spend my adrenaline. So I'm not curing any conditions, or I'm not cleansing any conditions. Now with the longbow, you can use your combustive shot anywhere. It doesn't matter if you hit somebody. You can just cast it in your spawn, and you'll still use that adrenaline. So no matter what, you'll always be removing conditions in the longbow using your burst ability. So the condition removal in this build is really good. I would say the one drawback from the build is in bigger group fights you start losing. You're not going to have the same sustainability as other groups or as other players. So what you want to do in this build is kind of maneuver in and out of the fight, go in and do your burst damage with your axe and do a few hits on your auto attacks, and then get out and then use your longbow attacks. You don't want to stay. This isn't a build where you're going to want to stay on the front lines. I actually love using this build as a roamer. In PvP, I love attacking the far point and contesting that. As long as one person is there, I can usually always win that 1 vs 1 fight. It's a very solid 1 vs 1 type of build. Unless it's like a decap energy or another cheesy build like that, then there's going to be different problems. But if there's just one person guarding that point, I could pretty much always win that 1v1. So extremely strong build, very popular right now. It has a lot of interesting mechanics with stacking might, and just the synergy between the weapon sets is great. The condition removal is very powerful. We have a lot of damage evasion abilities like Endure Pain and Berserker Stance. So give the build a try and let me know how you guys like it. Okay, let's look at our stats, our sigils, and our runes. For the stats, we have Berserker Amulet, that's power, precision, vitality, and ferocity. Now, if you went all Berserker in PvE, you wouldn't get the vitality, so if you want stats matching this, you need to get Valkyrie gear for your armor, and then for your weapons, your rings, accessories, backpiece, and your amulet, you want all Berserkers. So you're going to get the vitality from the Valkyrie on your armor, while still stacking the power and ferocity. And then the Berserker, your weapons, your accessories and stuff like that, you'll get the power, precision, ferocity from. For my runes, I'm picking Rune of Traveler, and you guys know I love movement speed in my builds. I really don't play many builds that don't have the plus 25% movement speed. So that's why I get it. I like this build as a roaming build in SPVP, so the movement speed helps. With that, I also get Boon Duration, which helps with the might stacking, and my Signet of Rage, so those boons last longer. And I get plus to all stats. Now, I could go into my traits, and you could say I could just grab Warrior Sprint in Discipline and get the 25% movement speed when I'm in my Axe and Shield. But if I was to do that, I would be taking up a trait just for movement speed, where I could get the movement speed on my rune, freeing up that trait to pick something more beneficial. For our sigils, we have a Sigil of Intelligence, 9-second cooldown on each one of our weapon sets. Now, what this does is when we swap to that weapon, the next 3 attacks have a 100% critical chance. So that really helps with the Eviscerate, and in our Longbow with our Arcing Arrow and our Combustive Shot. So make sure you're using your very powerful attacks after you swap to your weapon and your Sigil of Intelligence procs. The next sigils, we have Sigil of Battle on each weapon set. And I said before that stacking might is something we do really well in this build. This will give us 3 stacks of might every time we swap to that weapon while in combat with a 9-second cooldown. And we actually have a minor trait, Versatile Power, gain might on weapon swap. So we're actually gaining 4 stacks of might every time we swap weapons, or every time we swap weapons and the sigil's off of cooldown. So we're getting 4 stacks instead of 3. Anyway, that's our stats, our runes, and our sigils. Let's move on to our traits. Now for our traits, we have 4 in strength. We have Reckless Dodge, damage foes at the end of a dodge roll. Now it's not, we're always dodging, and especially since we're getting Vigorous Focus down here in Discipline, gain Vigor when using a stance, so we're going to be able to dodge a lot. And it's at AoE, we can hit up to 5 targets with this, with the Reckless Dodge, so it's actually pretty nice. Great Fortitude, a percentage of power is given as a bonus to Vitality. 7% power converted to Vitality, and we do have a ton of power in this build. So, it's nice But the thing is, really, there's not really any other good choices for us in this trait. I mean, restorative strength is a pretty nice trait, but we're using the healing signet, so we're not really going to benefit from that. But it's pretty much the only logical thing to take for us in this build, in this trait. Building momentum, burst skills restore endurance, and we'll be using our burst skills all the time. This will help us dodge more, and it ties right back into the reckless dodge. Axe mastery, gain ferocity while wielding an axe in your main hand. So when we use our eviscerate, or we're using our auto attack, which actually hits really hard with the axe, we will have a bit more crit damage in our build. To defense, we have thick skin, gain extra armor while your health is above the threshold. Sure-footed, increases stance durations. That's a 25% duration increase. And because we have 3 stances, it just makes sense to bring sure-footed. Adrenal health, regenerate health based on adrenaline level. Now we're going to be spending our adrenaline pretty often, so this isn't that big of a deal, but as we're building adrenaline, and especially since we have burst mastery, which is burst skills deal more damage and cost less, when we are in combat and we're fighting and we use a burst ability, the adrenaline only goes down to 1 bar. It doesn't completely empty. So that will we'll pretty much always have the level 1 healing from adrenal health. Cleansing Ire, gain adrenaline when hit, remove a condition for every bar of adrenaline spent. Now this trait is very strong with any weapon set, but this trait becomes extremely strong with the Longbow, because with the other weapon set burst abilities, you actually have to hit with the target to spend the adrenaline. So if somebody blocks you or if somebody dodges your attack, then you don't actually spend the adrenaline, and then you don't remove any conditions. With the Longbow, you can use combustive shot anywhere, and you are always spending the adrenaline. It doesn't matter if you hit anybody. It doesn't matter if you're in your spawn. It really doesn't matter. You use that adrenaline as soon as you use combustive shot. So combustive shot is always going to remove conditions, no matter what. So cleansing ire and the Longbow is there's a lot of powerful synergy there. In discipline, we have versatile rage, gain adrenaline on weapon swap. Vigorous focus, gain vigor when using a stance. Again, we have 3 stances, and we'll be using them quite often. So to get the vigor is nice, faster endurance regen, and that's more damage mitigation for us in this build. Fast hands, weapon swapping recharges faster. Now this is one of those traits, even though it's a minor trait, this is one of those traits in a build where once I use this trait in a build, I really have a difficult time making a build without this. Because the faster weapon swapping in this build, or for a warrior, is just so nice, and it's so difficult to pass up on that. Sharpened axes. Critical hits with axes grant extra adrenaline, and reduces recharge on axe skills by 20%. Versatile power. Gain might on weapon swap, so that helps with our sigil of battle. We'll be getting 4 stacks of might every time we swap weapons, instead of 3, and that just helps with the might stacking. And then burst mastery. Burst skills deal more damage and cost less. Cost reduction 33%, damage increase 7%. Now I will say there's actually some debate whether burst precision and strength is better than burst mastery. And I was actually using burst precision for a very long time. And then when I switched to burst mastery, I could just feel that it's much more beneficial. Mostly because the adrenaline buildup is faster because of the 33% cost reduction. So when we swap weapon sets, we are able to use our burst abilities right away instead of waiting for a little while. Alrighty, so let's go over our might stacking capabilities, because it's a very important part of this build, and one of the things I love about it is that it just happens naturally. It's not like a double dagger LE where you need to learn a ton of combos. There is 2 combos you need to learn, but they're very simple, and it just happens naturally. Now, let's look at the ways we get might in this build. We have Signet of Rage, which will give us 5 might. We have Versatile Power in our traits, which gives us might on weapon swap. And we also have Sigils of Battle on both of our weapon sets, which will give us 3 stacks of might when we swap weapons. So those are some ways we get it. Another way we can get it is using our Combustive Shot. That puts down a fire field. And then we could use Arcing Arrow, which is a blast finisher inside that fire field, and that will give us area might. so that gives it to our allies as well, and that gives us 3 stacks of might. And the last way that we get might is by using our combustive shot, and we can use shield bash or eviscerate. And because it's a leap finisher, we actually get a fire shield. And what the fire shield does is when people attack us and when they hit us, it gives us more might. So if we're by ourselves, we can get up to about 19 to 20 stacks of might. When we have the fire shield on and we're attacking somebody, we could pretty much get a solid 25 stacks of might in this build. And one of the great things that does is it not only improves our power damage, but it actually really improves our condition damage. So our conditioning damage will be around 900 condition damage once we have our 25 stacks of might. Meaning that like the burning from combustive shot and fan of fire, that's gonna start actually hurting the target. So we're doing tons of power damage, and we're doing a lot of condition damage as well. Okay, so we're gonna put our Signet of Rage on, get our 5 stacks of might. We can put down our combustive shot, and then our arcing arrow. That'll give us 3 stacks. And then we can swap, either use your shield bash or your eviscerate through the fire field to gain the fire shields, which gives us might when people attack us on a 1-second cooldown. And then we could just keep swapping. Go back, put your combustive shield down, or your combustive shot down, use your arcing arrow again, swap weapons. You can see we're at 19 stacks, use your eviscerate in your fire field, and then get your fire shields. And we can swap again, put our combustive shot down, use our arcing arrow. That's about it. You can see our might starting to drop a little bit, because our Signet of Rage we lost the might from the Signet of Rage. But you can see we can stack a ton of might in this build. I got up to 19 stacks at a time. When we have the fire shield on and we're being attacked, we're going to get even more. So make sure you learn, really the only 2 combos that you need to learn is the combustive shot with the arcing arrow. And after that, when you switch and your combustive shot, your fire field is still down, use your eviscerate or use your shield bash in the fire field, and that will give you the fire shield. Okay, let's go over our skills. We'll start on the right side and then go into our weapon sets. We are bringing the healing signet just because the healing signet it's a very powerful heal. Berserker stance. Now we are going to give vigor with all of our stances because we have 3 stances, and we have the trait that gives us vigor when we use a stance. Berserker stance makes us immune to conditions for 10 seconds. Now if we already have conditions on us, we will still take that damage, but once we activate Berserker stance, we can't have conditions applied to us for 10 seconds. And it also builds up adrenaline, so if you're really low on adrenaline, you could use this. Balance stance gives us stability and swiftness for 11.5 seconds. It is also a stun breaker. This is really good in situations like you're trying to stomp somebody, or you're trying to res your teammate. Then balance stance becomes very powerful in situations like that. The last one is Endure Pain. Take no damage from attacks for 5 seconds. So if a thief comes to try to gank us, we could throw on Endure Pain and he won't be able to do anything to us. This is a very strong utility to have. Then our elite, we have Signet of Rage. This gives us 34.5 seconds of Fury, 5 stacks of Might, and Swiftness. That's a very, very long time to have Fury on without having to worry about constantly reapplying it. So this will bring our crit over 50%, our crit chance over 50%, and the 5 stacks of Might help us reach 25 stacks of Might. For our axe and our shield, our burst ability is Eviscerate. It's a very strong hitting ability. There's something so satisfying about hitting somebody with Eviscerate because you can easily take 60% of somebody's health away just with one Eviscerate. And remember that we will remove conditions when we hit with Eviscerate because of Cleansing Ire. We get endurance back because of a trait we have where we use burst abilities. We gain 15 endurance. And it's also a leap finisher, so if we use it in our combustive shot, we will gain the fire shield that helps us stack might. The auto attack on the axe has to be one of the hardest hitting auto attacks in the game. I don't know of one that's stronger. There might be, but the amount of damage you can pump out with the auto attack chain with the main hand axe is ridiculous. And it also has a cleave, so we can hit multiple targets. So we can do about 5,000 to 6,000 damage through one chain, depending on how many times we crit. The second ability is Cyclone Axe. Spin around, hitting targets in an area, and we put 4 stacks of vulnerability on all those targets, increasing not only our damage, but also our teammates' damage to those people by 8%. And you can use it twice to be able to put, you can get up to 8 stacks of vulnerability on somebody because it comes off a cooldown before the stacks go away. So we can put 8 stacks of vulnerability on people for a little while. So constantly use this whenever it's up, or whenever it's off a cooldown. Use your Cyclone Axe just to increase your damage to the target even more. The third ability is Throw Axe. If somebody's trying to run away, it applies a 4 or 5 and a quarter second cripple. So it's very good when you're trying to chase people down. Now Shield Bash is a stun, a 1-second stun. What Shield Bash is great for is after we put our Combustive Shot down, we can use our Shield Bash because it is a leap finisher in the fire field to gain a fire shield, and it also helps set up our Eviscerate. So if you're fighting against somebody who's experienced at going against a warrior with an axe, they'll constantly be watching out for your Eviscerate. So your Shield Bash, you can stun somebody, then use your Eviscerate right after, and there's no way that they can escape from it. So it's a great way to set up your Eviscerate. Then the last ability is Shield Stance, where we block all attacks for 3 seconds, which helps with you can see a lot of the abilities that we bring is all about damage mitigation. So even though we are a very squishy kind of build, we have so much damage mitigation, like being immune to conditions and being immune to physical attacks, and then we have a block as well. So that's the whole goal here. If we go into our Longbow, we have Combustive Shot, which not only does burning damage, but it also does power damage as well. As you can see, all those numbers pop up. So this ability alone does tons of damage. If we look at Pin Down, our number 5, we can use Pin Down on somebody and then throw down our Combustive Shot, and they have to sit there in the Combustive Shot for a little while and they can't get out of it. It's also great to use on points because either the person has to stand in it or they're going to have to get off of the point. It's great for point harassing in SPVP. The auto attack on the Longbow is pretty useless. It doesn't really do any damage at all. If you need a little bit of adrenaline, then I guess you could use it, but I honestly wouldn't even waste my time using it. Then we have Fan of Fire, which shoots 3 fire arrows out in a cone, and it stacks up some burning. What's really good about Fan of Fire is if you have your Combustive Shot down, they're already taking tons of burning damage and it's stacking up. Then you can stand. I would always use Fan of Fire like right in somebody's face because then they will get hit by all 3 arrows, stacking up the burning on that target. The third one is Arcing Arrow. That is a very important ability in the Longbow set because it does a ton of damage. Make sure you have your Combustive Shot down because this is a blast finisher and the Combustive Shot is a fire field. So we will gain area might if we use Arcing Arrow inside of the Combustive Shot. Then the last ability on the Longbow is Smoldering Arrow. When it hits a target, it explodes, blinding all targets around that target. Blind is like not the greatest thing in the world, but still it's damage mitigation. So hopefully they use an attack when they have blinds on and they don't realize it and they waste a cooldown. Anyway, those are our abilities. Again, we have Berserker Stance, Balance Stance, and Endure Pain with Signet of Rage and the Healing Signet. So, yeah, those are our abilities. Remember that Eviscerate, Combustive Shot, and Arcing Arrow are the abilities you're going to want to be using the most because those are the hardest hitting abilities we have in this build. Alright guys, well that is the build. It's extremely effective in SPVP, that's where I mostly use it. You can also bring it out to World vs. World. I keep the Longbow, and you might want to bring the Greatsword just for some more mobility in World vs. World because it's very important. But anyway, I hope you guys give it a try. Let me know how you like it. If you have any thoughts or opinions, then leave it in the comments. Also, if you have any questions about the build, leave it in the comments below, and I will get back to you. Thanks for watching, guys. So we can put on roughly 5 to 8 Confusion, 3 to 5 torment, 6 vulnerability, 6 stacks of bleeding, and a chill onto a target. Now having 8 stacks of confusion on a target is very dangerous to them because when you think of like a double dagger Ellie, confusion is very powerful against them because they have to use a lot of skills very quickly. Another positive of this build is that we have escape abilities through some abilities such as Withdraw and Shadow Step, and also through stealthing with our Cloak and Dagger. This is very much needed in this build because we are most definitely a hit and run type build where we want to